Coming up on Network Africa, Vice President of South Sudan, Riek Machar, charged with murder, treason and crimes against humanity. Burkina Faso announces the scrapping of visa fees for all African travelers. Plus, the Assistant Secretary General for the UN Global Compact calls on Africa to lead and not only adapt at the Global Africa Business Initiative in New York. Hello and welcome to the program. It's the last episode for the week. I'm Layo Olarinde. We begin in South Sudan, where the first Vice President, Riek Machar, has been charged with murder, treason and crimes against humanity. Justice Minister Joseph Akech said the charges against Mr. Machar relate to an attack back in March by a militia allegedly linked to the Vice President that killed 250 soldiers and a general. However, Mr. Machar's spokesperson has condemned this move, calling it a political witch hunt. The roads leading to Mr. Machar's house in the capital, Juba, have been blocked by tanks and soldiers. He had been under house arrest since March, with the UN, African Union and neighboring countries all calling for calm. There are fears this latest development could reignite the country's civil war. Now, experts are warning of a new and worrying trend that is emerging in South Sudan, armed groups kidnapping aid workers for ransom. Humanitarian officials say since the start of the year, more than 30 South Sudanese aid workers have been abducted, and that's more than double the number kidnapped in all of 2024. Several of those abducted have been released after ransom payments, but one person died in captivity earlier this month. He was James Onguba, a South Sudanese aid worker who was kidnapped last month in the county of Tambura in Western Equatorial State and died in captivity on September 3rd. He worked for a local aid organization and was said to have been abducted by men dressed in national military uniforms. Now, while the United Nations and most aid groups adhere to a strict non-payment of ransom policy, families of the victims sometimes use neutral actors, including churches and intermediaries, to make payments. While the UN has long designated South Sudan one of the most dangerous places for humanitarian workers, but the surge in kidnaps for ransom could make humanitarian work impossible in the country that's already facing one of the world's most severe humanitarian crises. We're still in South Sudan. In response to the growing humanitarian needs in the town of Malakal, a high delegation led by Anita Kikigebo, the Deputy Special Representative of the UN Secretary General and the UN Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator, the delegation has traveled to Malakal. The delegation is engaging with local authorities, displaced communities and key stakeholders to assess the evolving situation in the town. Also to evaluate preparedness measures and identify urgent humanitarian needs on the ground. In a bid to enable early warnings to communities at risk, the state's task force set up in 2024, led by the government, but also made up of UN officials and other stakeholders, is closely monitoring the water levels of the River Nile and elsewhere. The UN mission in the country, UNMISS, humanitarian actors and other stakeholders expressed hope that sufficient funding can take Malakal and Upper Nile state through this critical period, and that peace will make it possible for the internally displaced to return home or be resettled.
The meeting with the governor and the ministers was extremely helpful. I think the good news story here is that when we come together, it is possible to make a difference. Meeting with the IDPs, those who are displaced within the camp, they are clear, they want to go back. What they need is safety, they need services, water, food, education, healthcare, which would be possible even in these very difficult times.
We have decided in prioritizing and based on the accessibility and the funding that we have. We are now, our priority locations include Malakal County and Ulang and Fashoda and Nasir. But some of these places also depend on the accessibility. And these are the hotspot areas in terms of flooding.
We're in West Africa now. Burkina Faso says it has removed visa fees for all African travelers, and this is in an effort to facilitate the movement of people and goods into the country. Mahamadou Sana, the country's security minister, says from now on, any citizen from an African country wishing to go to Burkina Faso will not pay any amount to cover visa fees. He said this after a cabinet meeting chaired by the military leader, Captain Ibrahim Traore, on Thursday. However, the minister clarified that African visitors will be required to submit an online visa application, which will be reviewed for approval. The West African nation joins countries such as Ghana, Rwanda, and Kenya, which have all eased travel requirements for African visitors. Joining us now for more details on this story is our Sahel correspondent, Mohseni Aliyu. Hello, Mo. Thank you for your time.
For having me live.
Well, from your vantage point, as you know, in the Sahel, how does Burkina Faso's visa fee waiver fit into the wider political and economic dynamics of the region?
Well, first things first, Burkina Faso and the two other members of the Association of Sahel States, that is Niger and Mali, really practically do not want to be estranged from the wider ECOWAS region, that is the West African region. Though they are still not part of the West African economic bloc, the ECOWAS, but all travelers hitherto, since they left the ECOWAS region, all African travelers from the West African sub-region have not been subjected to any hardship or sanctions when they cross into Burkina Faso and Mali and Niger, by the way. Therefore, to us, we live in here in Ghana and Nigeria, whatever, there will not be a big difference. As the minister said, Burkina Faso wants to bring, Africans as part of the AU mission to have one Africa. They want Africans to get into Burkina Faso using the visa-free scheme that you said in your introduction that Ghana, Rwanda, and Kenya have already implemented. So it's in that range, or in that particular vein, that Burkina Faso is trying to bring all these other African nations, give them access. But there is a wider political matter at play. They want acceptance. As I said, Burkina Faso does not want to be estranged from Africa. In fact, the opposite is the case from the people I've been speaking to here at the border with Burkina Faso here in Tamale. And inside Burkina Faso, when I was there 2 months ago, I realized that the people of Burkina Faso, who are brothers across the border in Mali, in Niger, in Nigeria, and even in Cote d'Ivoire, they still want to continue living together, doing business together, and being their brothers' keepers. That is what I can say for now.
And given the persistent, insecurity across the Sahel borders, aren't there, challenges that authorities will face, in balancing open travel with security concerns?
Yeah, that's right. The northern part of Burkina Faso and the eastern part, northeastern part, are mostly occupied by insurgent groups. The Ansaru, the ISWAP, and many other, insurgent groups are active in that region. In fact, over the last 2-3 months, there has been a steady stream of Burkina Faso citizens moving to the central and southern parts of the country to seek refuge from vicious attacks by these Boko Haram style terrorists. So people getting into Burkina Faso now have very few options. The safest way to get into Burkina Faso is through the southern borders. That is from Cote d'Ivoire, from Ghana, from Togo, and from Benin Republic. So most of the nations in that particular part, the coastal states there, people pass through them because even from Niger, which is the neighboring country west of Burkina Faso, their citizens have to go through Benin Republic and Togo before they can get into Burkina Faso, because the road between Niamey and Ouagadougou has become unusable due to terrorist activity there. So the country's government has been trying and fighting the terrorist groups in the north and in the northeast with Russian help, of course, but there are still so many obstacles in their way. So people will find it very difficult to get into the country, even if they have visas, unless, of course, if they're going through the southern countries, as I mentioned earlier. This is the situation right now. So that is something that is, at work. The government has to find a way to clear those parts, the northern and the northeastern part of the country, for people to be able to move freely.
And you mentioned earlier, Mo, about Burkina Faso citizens who have family, brothers in other countries. I imagine this is now good news for them, particularly for traders, travelers, and the local communities who depend on cross-border movement.
Excellent. Yeah, that is true, because many people in northern Ghana, actually, even the paramount leader in Burkina Faso is said to be, his ancestors come from northern Ghana, the region of Tamale here. And so these people are related, and there is a lot of trade. Even in Accra, you will find that there is a market in the central part of Accra called Nima, where all the goods and services that people require in Burkina Faso, they use that as a base to launch or to transfer and transport people and services and goods across the northern border of Ghana into Burkina Faso. And so many people are connected. This political problem between ECOWAS and these AES states has hit them hard in a way, but things are looking up. It looks like the Burkina Faso government is finally reaching out, because there is talk of some reapproachment. No, they are not saying that they're going back into the ECOWAS sub-region or into the ECOWAS fold, but it looks like some significant progress is being made between the AES states and the ECOWAS states, so that trade and travel and other restrictions that have hitherto been in place will be removed.
Yeah, and talking about the AES states very quickly, do you see, Mali and Niger, probably consider this similar measures? What might drive or perhaps deter them?
Yes, this is a point I spoke about earlier with one of the people I met, who is also a dual citizen of Ghana and Burkina Faso. He said that he's been to Ghana for the past 2 years. He's been in Ghana for the past 2 years, but that some of the people in the ECOWAS region that have spoken to traders from Mali and Niger are saying that these countries really do not, the governments of these three countries really do not want to have problems with the other countries of world. In fact, most of the goods and services that get into Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso come from the coastal states, including Nigeria. So it will serve them really well for, this movement of goods and services, and open borders will serve these three countries. So I am really very sure, very certain that very soon these two other countries, that is Mali and Niger, would also find an opportunity to open their borders to the broader West African and African nations, citizens from these countries, to get their goods and services into those countries. It's a win-win situation from what I can see from here.
Indeed, in the end, a united Africa is what we are looking to. But thank you so much, Mo Sani Aliyu, our Channels TV's Sahel correspondent. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Layo.
Well, let's take a break now on Network Africa. Still to come. On our Africa Tech segment, we tell you about Sierra Leonean entrepreneur who's creating saltwater-activated tech to address the power challenges in the country. Please join us again. Welcome back to the program. The Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations Global Compact says Africa must not only adapt, it has to lead. Ms. Sanda Ojambo made this comment during a press briefing on the flagship event of the Global Africa Business Initiative, GABI, that's taking place on Sunday and Monday, 21st to 22nd September 2025. In New York. Since its inception in 2022, GABI has convened global private sector leaders, CEO, investors, industry leaders, academics, UN leaders, and heads of government at its various convenings. The annual flagship event, Unstoppable Africa, held on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York, has witnessed the active participation of 10 heads of state and over 8,000 participants.
Only adapt, it has to lead. And that's why the Global Africa Business Initiative exists. Launched in 2022 with a clear goal, as I said, to change how the world views Africa and does business with Africa. The biggest themes that we're going to tackle this year, the overall theme is the big push, how Africa shapes markets. We're going to tackle a few critical topics. Building African-led global trade, investment and business partnerships, maximizing the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement for trade and value chains, strengthening digital technology and innovation, positioning Africa as a global investment hub, and supporting the sports and the creative sectors. Every day in your reporting, you tell the story of Africa's challenges. There's also a story of Africa's progress that you tell. We want to elevate that and amplify that. It's a story of innovation, resilience, and ambition. What we want to, highlight with Unstoppable Africa is the fact that the private sector continues to remain robust. Even where there is conflict and strife, business will still continue. And I think, one of the strongest messages that we hear from African private sector leaders is African political leaders is oftentimes the private sector exists and continues to help almost de-risk, provide an environment of safety, calling for investment, and also just demonstrating that people will still need the goods and the services that are provided. There are significant challenges, political strife, illicit financial flows, challenges around governance, but there's a strong and robust private sector, and that's what all of those leaders are here to talk about, the need to really build that infrastructure for private sector to grow. The criticality really is the opportunity that we have to recognize Africa's availability to solve for world problems in food security, in energy security, and in digital transformation. What does private sector, on the flip side, ask of government? They're asking for peace and stability. They're ready to invest in it.
South African authorities on Friday have reopened the investigation into the death of Steve Biko exactly 48 years after police killed the anti-apartheid activist in detention. The National Prosecuting Authority says the investigation's reopening is part of a wider effort to address the atrocities of the past and assist in providing closure to the Biko family and society at large. Stephen Bantu Biko was the founder of South Africa's grassroots anti-apartheid Black consciousness movement. He was just 30 years old when he was arrested in August 1977 and jailed in Pretoria. A month later, he died from extensive brain injury in his prison cell after police officers beat him into a coma. His death sparked outrage even beyond South Africa, and over the next 48 years, he became a symbol for Black liberation and his country's anti-apartheid struggle. Welcome to our Africa Tech segment. Sierra Leone entrepreneur Oswald Dundas is making waves for West Africa after inventing saltwater-powered technology to address poor access to electricity in his hometown, Freetown. While demonstrating the process of activating his inventions, Mr. Dundas says with just 2 tablespoons of salt mixed with water filled in the Waterlight portable lantern and stove device, you can have almost 120 hours of light. Mr. Dundas is set to represent West Africa at the Startup World Cup in Silicon Valley in October, where he'll compete for a $1 million investment prize. The 34-year-old tech entrepreneur beat out 30 startup companies in Sierra Leone with Waterlight, a device that uses salt water to generate up to 600 hours of light.
I was struggling from the fact that people burn a lot of plastics in our communities. I suffer from asthmatic allergies. And I was thinking to myself that if I don't find a solution to the pollution problem myself, I could lose my life, my health could deteriorate, and it would be difficult for me to achieve the dreams that I want to achieve. So one of the things I thought I could use the plastic waste to fix was the problem of lack of school furniture, where there are still thousands, if not millions, of school kids that are learning on the bare floor. Most of them developing health problems and some even losing interest in education entirely. So I was like, can I turn the plastic?
So there must be a solution. And that's where Waterlight technology comes in. The earth is full of 70% water, mostly seawater. And you'll be surprised to know that with just 2 tablespoons of salt mixed with the water for our devices, you will have almost 120 hours of light. So Waterlight technology was developed in 2018 as a result of the poor access to electricity. So there must be a solution, and that's where Waterlight technology comes in. The earth is full of 70% water, mostly seawater. You'll be surprised to know that with just 2 tablespoons of salt mixed with the water for our devices, you will have almost 120 hours of light. So the entire device will give you about 600 hours of light, which is a huge difference compared to the existing solutions that they have presently. Yes, representing Sierra Leone at the Silicon Valley, it's a huge task because I'm not only representing my business or going for the seed funding of $1 million, I'm also representing Sierra Leone. Basically, there are 2 biggest challenges. One is the access to technology. We know Sierra Leone is limited in terms of technology, in terms of access to certain materials you need. And over the years, I've had my own share of disappointment when I need something. I have to spend a lot of time developing and creating that thing. And the most important also is funding. And in Sierra Leone, we don't have access to funding for innovations.
And as we end the program today, here's a fun fact about the continent. Did you know that South Africa's highest court has ruled that husbands can now take the surname of their wives, overturning a law that barred them from doing so? In a victory for 2 couples who brought the case, the Constitutional Court ruled that the law was a colonial import that amounted to gender-based discrimination. The law was introduced in South Africa during the years of white minority rule. 2 couples had argued that the law was archaic and patriarchal and violated equality rights enshrined in the Constitution. Well, Parliament will now have to amend the Births and Deaths Registration Act along with its regulations for the ruling to take effect. And that's it on the program for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde. Have a lovely weekend.